So Corbett, thank you for taking the time. Thank you for joining me today. I really appreciate it.
Hey, I'm really happy to be here, Danny.
Awesome. So I figured we'd start things off with you at 18 years old. You got a full-time job working for the county sheriff's office as a clerk. And could you tell me a little bit about what that experience was like?
Yeah, I had grown up very blue collar. My dad worked at a gas station and then later at a factory. And my mom worked 3 jobs over the holidays to be able to afford Christmas presents for me and my sister. So I didn't know what I wanted to be when I grew up necessarily. I didn't even know if I was going to go to college. I ended up going to community college where I lived only because I got a scholarship at the end, but neither of my parents had gone to college. So I was kind of lost at 18, to be honest. And a few things just fell into place for me right away. The first is I got this scholarship. So I decided, what the heck, I'm going to go to college. And then one day in the summer after I graduated high school, I was planning to go to college, not sure what I was going to do for a job. In fact, I think I had just applied for a job at Subway, the sandwich shop, and they turned me down for some reason. So I was feeling pretty crappy about my prospects. But I was over at my girlfriend's house in the summer, and someone who brought their kids to my girlfriend's mom's daycare was there. She was asking me what I was up to, what I was going to do after I graduated, and so on. And I said, I don't know. I don't have a job yet, blah, blah, blah. And she said, well, we're looking for temps down at the sheriff's office because we have a bunch of filing to do. And as long as you've got some clerical skills, can use the computer a little bit, you'd probably be a good fit. So that was my first gig, right out of college. And I started out just filing paperwork and so on. But pretty quickly, it became clear that they had all kinds of computer problems and nobody around the office that could really do much with that. So I just kept putting myself in situations where I could help out. I was just as helpful as I could be. And pretty much within a couple of months, they asked me to come on full time. And then I just worked my way up. And over the course of those first few years in college, I continued to work there. I worked full time. I went to school in the mornings and at night. And then they promoted me until eventually I was the information systems coordinator, which meant I was basically in charge of all the different computer projects going on at the sheriff's office.
How'd you get started with computers?
Well, when I was 7 years old or so, one of my cousins got a computer, and this is going way back to the 80s. One of my cousins got a computer from Radio Shack called the TRS-80, and he was showing it to me one day. I also, in school, we had gotten these Apple IIe computers, and we played this game called Oregon Trail on it a lot. And so it was just kind of around at the time. Computers were this cool thing. And I don't know if I was reading a magazine or what, but there was this new computer coming out called the Commodore 64. And it was a personal computer, meaning, it was a little thing where the computer was contained in the keyboard and you plugged it into a TV set as the monitor. And I think it was like $300 or $400, which was really expensive at the time. But somehow I begged my parents, who are hardworking, but the most amazing, generous people in their lives, in my life. And they somehow made it happen for me. They bought me a Commodore when I was like 7 or 8 years old. And so I would spend hours reading a magazine. There was a magazine called Byte Magazine, and it would have in the back of it programs, and you could spend like a day copying that program in. I didn't know what it did, but when you were done, you would see like a ball bounce across the screen or something. And that was the most exciting thing for a kid who is obsessed with video games.
Oh, I have so many questions. Were you, were you one of the only of your friends who enjoyed computers, or was this a school-wide thing, or were you just way more interested than most people?
I was way more interested than most people. I would say that most of my friends had video games of some sort, and I had a video game called the ColecoVision, and then a friend in the neighborhood got a Nintendo, the original Nintendo NES. And so there was definitely a culture of playing video games, Atari, all that kind of stuff. But as far as computers go, I was the only one that I knew with one. And I used it a lot for games as well. I mean, there were amazing games on it. You could hook up a joystick to it and so on, but I also used it for testing out programs and ideas and stuff. It wasn't until middle school when I met another kid on my block who was also into computers. He got an IBM PC compatible computer, which is Windows, eventually became Windows. So the two of us really spent a lot of time just geeking out on the computer.
What made you so fascinated by computers to begin with?
I don't know, something about the freedom of expression and creation on a computer. I loved video games and I loved consuming them, but I also was curious about how things were made. And the idea that you could type in code into a machine and then it would do something for you. I knew there was power there and it seemed like it was the future. It was happening right now. So that was enough to get me hooked.
Yeah, it's so interesting. And so one of the things that in doing research for this is that you've said before that you've been jealous of creative types of people and creatives. And it's interesting because I view people who do work on the computer as creative. So how do you see that connection?
I do as well. And I think now society in general is recognizing people that code as much more creative types because, you are, it's like putting together a puzzle without an example, and that's super fun. And I still absolutely love prototyping a new system and getting something up and running. And I spend a lot of time coding. And I would also say that making podcasts and making videos and that sort of thing is also very creative. And now you ask kids what they want to do for a living and they say they want to be a YouTuber, right? So it's definitely a creative thing. However, I think the way I grew up, real creatives were artists and writers and musicians and people like that. And I still have tremendous respect for those people. It's not an easy road trying to be a writer or to get attention for your music or something. My wife is an artist and she's been at it for a very long time. And she's just, recently seeing monetary success. It's a long, long path. So I romanticize that kind of creative, and I'm not trying to put down the new style creative, but also, I don't know when I said that, but things are changing rapidly. And I would say if that kind of quote came out 10 years ago, my perspective is probably different now because so many people are expressing themselves with the tools that have been made available on the internet.
Yeah. And it's so fascinating because you can read something from you 10 years ago and believe something completely different today. And obviously you did that by wiping away 90%, I believe, of all the things that you've put out on the internet. My perspective as someone who's 25, you're, I believe, 43. Is that correct?
Yep.
It made me nervous, man, when I saw you do this, because I'm like, am I going to not believe 90% of the things that I say or put out on the internet in 10 years? That's a possibility. How should I be thinking about that?
Well, and just to be clear, it's not that I didn't believe the things that I put out. I just started to feel like, I felt like I created a lot of those profiles on the internet, on all those different platforms, because technology and the internet in general want things from us. When you go on the internet, you have all of these people and businesses and platforms competing for your attention, and they just want you to spend your time there. They want you to invest in that platform so that your effort attracts other people to that platform as well. So we start off on Instagram and Facebook and LinkedIn and Twitch and all these places with personal attention or personal intentions, right? We want something from that platform, but that platform is a lot more sophisticated than we are as individuals. They've spent, so many people have spent time tuning it to keep our attention. So it's not that I didn't believe what I had said on all of these places, but it's kind of like whenever you say something on the internet out there, if you aren't actively paying attention to that thing and the comments that are happening about it, it's almost like people are having a conversation with you, but you're not there or you're not listening. And I'm not there to represent myself. And it wasn't that I even said anything controversial. I just started to feel like there was digital baggage that I created out there. And I wanted to clean it up. And I don't know where this feeling comes from, but I also feel like it's not normal for us to have every little thing that we've uttered available for the world to see for all time. And this has only been the past 10 or 15 years that social media has really encouraged us all to say and share everything to be available for everyone. And of course, those platforms want those things to stay there, because then somebody might go on and say, oh, Danny Miranda, said this thing back in 2015 or whatever, when he was in high school. And oh my God, isn't that crazy? And maybe that, keeps them engaged there. It doesn't necessarily mean it's bad for you or whatever. But I think there's power in focus. And I'm also a big fan of the open internet. And this is something that, for those of us who got started really early on the internet, remember when it was all open, because protocols like email are open, meaning that there's no one place that you have to go to email someone. If I want to email you, as long as I have your address, I can email you through any server, anywhere in the world. I don't have to be a member of anything, have an account, that sort of thing. And podcasting is another open platform, because if I have your RSS feed, I can plug it into any player I want. And now you see what's happening with podcasting. Spotify and now Apple, with their subscriptions that they just announced, they're all trying to grab their piece of it and turn it into a walled garden. They're trying to take what is free and open on the internet and own it for themselves, so that you have to go through their platform in order to consume that content, which means they can then put up barriers and paywalls and all that kind of stuff. So part of my desire to leave some of the platforms behind was just to start putting my money where my mouth is. If I believe that those platforms aren't necessarily in the best interest of society and the internet, then I should be spending more time on other platforms, like podcasting, for example. I decided, instead of spending time on Instagram, that I was going to spend time being on other shows every week this year. And I feel like that's a much better use of my time.
And so my question to you, though, is, do you believe that it's inevitable that open systems will turn into closed systems, because people will, and companies will see that there's a tension in that avenue and will try to make it their own?
It's tough, because there's tension here. And you have to just remember that Spotify and Apple and all these others, they pay thousands and thousands of incredibly smart people to sit around all day and think about, how can we take this thing over that's happening on the internet for ourselves, to create profit for ourselves and for our shareholders. And, we could talk about capitalism if you wanted to, but that power is always, that force is always going to be there as long as they have a profit motive. So it's up to consumers and casual users to put privacy first, to let these companies know what we value, and to choose platforms that we believe are in our best long-term interest. Now, it's tough when all of your friends are on Facebook or all of your friends are on some platform. And I don't fault a business owner, for example, for wanting to be on those platforms, because you might be able to grow a following there. And we see all the time, the latest kid on TikTok now has 1 million followers, and it happened overnight, literally overnight sometimes. So there are opportunities there. But as you grow, as you have more opportunities, as you are able to make more choices, I just think that it is in all of our best interest and responsibility to choose open systems where we can.
So you've chosen podcasts as your main avenue. You've chosen writing and writing on your blog. But I noticed you're still on Twitter, and you're still on the closed system of Twitter. What went into that decision?
So about 6 months ago, I decided to start over, and I literally deleted every social media post on all platforms that I had ever written. I deleted a lot of blog posts, old podcasts, old videos, stuff like that I just wanted to clean up, to basically make sure that when someone encountered my digital self out there, that I was putting my best foot forward. And I think that's a good exercise for anyone. I then started thinking about which platforms I wanted to continue to participate in. And I looked at which ones are giving me any sort of value. and which ones had a return on my investment of time. And in a lot of cases, there's this sort of emotional drain that happens when you spend time on a social platform. And for me, it comes down to either the comparison trap, looking at what other people are doing and not being able to continually tell my brain that that's not really who that person is. That's how they represent themselves, but it's natural for us. So the comparison trap, and then also a little bit of fear of missing out and worrying that if I'm not checking in on this platform, but then you spend a bunch of time on that platform and you realize you didn't actually accomplish anything. So that led me to the decision to basically close all of my accounts: Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, whatever, all the randos. I then got down to Twitter and I just thought, oh, maybe there's still something here. And I wanted to stay connected just because I have friends there that I actually enjoy talking with. And it doesn't have the emotional drain as much for me. Also because I can test out ideas before I'm ready to publish them on my blog. I can just put out a tweet, see what people think about it, have a little conversation, and then see if I want to go further with it. I don't know if that decision will stick. I also think that Twitter is the closest to a public utility of all of the platforms. If you think about it, when someone wants to announce something, they go to Twitter. Our last president was on Twitter all the time, and that's where people found out what was going on. It's that kind of place that has this amazing public aspect to it. And if you listen to some of what Jack Dorsey and others there are trying to do, they actually have some intention of using open protocols within Twitter. They have a project in the works. I don't know if they're going that way. They might just be saying that to make us all feel better about it. But I think they have the greatest shot of actually making that happen. So I'm not saying it's right for everybody. It just worked out for me in that case. I don't even know if I'll be there in 6 months or a year. It's possible I might not be.
What's been the reaction from friends and family?
Well, I would say that you find out that a lot of people actually have left platforms for a while. You'll get comments from people in other places. Maybe they're still on Twitter, but they aren't on Facebook anymore, or maybe they text you or whatever, and they say, "Oh, I left Facebook 4 years ago, and it was the greatest decision I ever made." So there's almost this pride of the date that you first left Facebook, right? So you hear that from people. From business owners, I would say, other entrepreneur friends, I would say they've been curious. They have mostly expressed a desire to do the same thing themselves, but a worry that their business actually depends on those platforms. In my case, I didn't find any really negative effects not from being there. I don't think that we have built our businesses over the years overly dependent on social media, but they've definitely played a part. So overall, I have more time. I feel a lot better about myself. I'm glad that I'm not participating in those channels. And I would encourage anyone who's worried about it or thinking about it to try it. In fact, most of the platforms don't want you to leave. So they give you the ability, or they don't give you the ability to actually turn your account off right away. Instead, they put it on hold for 30 days or something. And if you come back, if you log in, it starts right back up. So you can basically pull the plug. And then if you change your mind within a month, you're right back up and running.
Yeah, it's so interesting because I deleted Instagram a few days ago, and I've gotten about 100 messages from Instagram, emails rather, telling me to come back and that my stuff is available. So it's very interesting, the type of pull that is used. What I'm curious about from your perspective is, how have you found the headspace? Do you feel as if you've had more headspace? Talk to me about that.
Yes, I do. Although, you hear this about people who have a vice or an addiction. When they quit one, they often take up another, and you might think smoking is the lesser of two evils. So you're happy that you're not drinking, but now you're smoking more. I would say for me, I've been spending more time on Twitter than I used to, probably because I don't have Instagram to check or whatever. So that's a concern. However, I do have more headspace because for me, there's this cognitive tension that happens when I feel like there are things that I should be doing, but I don't have time to do. And those places I felt like I was obligated to, but I wasn't able to spend time there often, Facebook, Twitter, whatever. And then I would feel bad about that, bad about not keeping them up. And so I would go through this up and down cycle of, okay, I'm going to actually pay attention to Facebook. I need to be posting here because it matters to my business. And I would do that for a while, but then I would feel like I dropped the ball on Instagram. And it was just this kind of whack-a-mole game of dealing with my guilt and obligations. And so now that I don't have those, I am much calmer about it. So even though I'm spending more time on Twitter, I would say that overall my head is much clearer.
What do you think that social media is going to be like in 20 years? Because I think you were talking about, what is it like for a creator to be in their 50s or 60s? I believe it was you who was talking about that. And it just got me thinking, like, what is social media going to be like in your 60s or 70s? Like, we don't really have an archetype for that type of person who uses social media that late in their life. Do you think social media will be around in 20 years?
Oh, absolutely. There's no question it'll be around. So I live in Mexico in the winters every year for 12 years or so now with my wife. And we know a lot of people who are actually in their late 60s and 70s because there's retirees there. And they use Facebook a lot. Let me tell you, it's where they get their news. They spend their 2 hours in the morning drinking their coffee, scrolling Facebook. They do it obsessively. So it works on people of all ages, from unfortunately, 5 years old all the way up till you're too old to care about it anymore. And I haven't met anyone. I mean, we do know some people in their late 80s, and I would say they don't seem to care about it. So maybe they've realized eventually at the very end of life that there's more to life than sitting in front of your tablet, checking out what other people are doing, because people are doing things all around you. You just have to, start a conversation. So I think it will be around, or I'm sure that it will be around. My hope is that, they start to tamp down a little bit of the manipulation that happens on the platforms. We see them trying to do this a little bit. Facebook and Instagram have both experimented with downplaying the likes or removing the likes or allowing individuals to choose if they want to remove the likes, because really it's that number that makes you feel good or bad about yourself and your social standing. In like tribal times, we all had to worry about our pecking order and where we stood in the social order, but you never really knew, right? You just kind of thought about it. But now it's almost like we all know, oh, Danny, he's doing great because he got 100 likes on that post or whatever. So it's a very manipulative, motivating in a bad way kind of thing. And I think that they're going to tamp that down. I also hope that there may be some open protocols integrated into these, so that imagine your posts go through the Twitter network, but you're not necessarily in the Twitter app. Maybe you're in another app in a way. And I don't just mean cross posting. I think there are actually protocols that would allow you to do this. Maybe, and some of these exist already. There's a protocol called Mastodon, for example, which is more of like a peer-to-peer social networking. So anyway, not to get too into the technical weeds, but I think that there may be a little bit more portability. Back in the day, you couldn't take your phone number with you from phone to phone, from cell phone to cell phone. So imagine, you had a Verizon number and you wanted to sign up with Sprint. You had to get a completely new phone number. And that was a great way for those companies to keep you locked in, but a terrible thing for the consumer. So they came up with something called number portability. And now it's common. You just expect it's my phone number. I take it where I want. I think we may eventually get to a similar place with social media.
So what would that look like in practicality?
Well, if Twitter didn't own your content, what if you owned your content and you took your content wherever you wanted, and people could consume your content with whatever tool they wanted? A lot like you do with RSS. If I publish something on my blog, it doesn't require Twitter or Facebook or anyone else, but you can consume that somewhere. And now, of course, we have an RSS-like thing, AMP, where Apple News, Facebook, others can pull that content from the Washington Post or whoever they care about and put that news inside of their own app. So it's a little bit more like that. Of course, they still figure out ways to manipulate that, but at least the Washington Post doesn't have to necessarily go and publish their things on every platform. They know that it can be pulled by those platforms when they publish it on their own site.
Gotcha. Yeah, that's an interesting way to think about the future of the internet. I'd like to switch gears here a little bit and talk about a quote from you, you published this, I believe, in 2010, so it might be a little outdated, but you said, some of the people around me think I'm throwing my life away or running from something. And I'm curious if, reflecting back on yourself, if you believe those people are right or you believe that there's nuance there. I'm curious about what you believe of other people were thinking about you and if that was actually correct.
Objectively, I believe those people were wrong looking back, but I don't think that means that they would think that they're wrong necessarily. And the only reason for that is we all want to validate our own decisions. So when most of your friends and family are in traditional corporate jobs, then they probably tell themselves that you're throwing your life away or that you're taking unnecessary risks or that there's something wrong with being an entrepreneur or wanting to have a popular podcast or whatever, because it validates their decision. And I think that's what I was getting at in that case. At that time, I was only a few years removed from having been a Fortune 500 consultant where I was paid to travel around the world, flew first class, and did all this stuff that on paper sounds amazing, but in practice is an awful lifestyle. Now, if I had stuck with that, I know what the outcome was. I had partners, who were friends in the firm then, and I know friends who stuck there and are now principals or partners in the firm and what their life is like. And I don't want that life and I don't regret that decision. But at the time, it probably looked like I had a trajectory to these friends, sort of like if you're in a law firm, if you stick around for 20 years and you do your job, you're probably going to make a lot of money and have a really big title. But I can also tell you that those people I've witnessed do that often have a major crisis at midlife because they climb up the ladder hoping that they're going to reach the top and feel really great about themselves, their lives, their accomplishments, but end up just feeling emptiness because it is all just a hamster wheel of earning more money so that you can spend that money on things that are supposed to make you feel good because you don't enjoy your day to day, because the commute, the hours, the pressure, all that stuff. And I have a very comfortable lifestyle. I make plenty of money. We live wherever we want. I work when I want. I work with who I want. I make all my decisions. And even if my earnings were less than they were in my other life, the sliding doors of my life, whatever that would have been, I would still be happy. But it turns out that you can earn just as much or more being an entrepreneur. There's just a few years that are really rough and full of uncertainty. But eventually, you see examples all the time of people who are running popular podcasts and charging tens of thousands of dollars for a sponsor. And it doesn't mean that everybody's going to be able to do that, but not everybody can do a lot of things. We all have to find our path in life. And if that's your path, there's no reason you shouldn't go after it.
How did you come to that decision of saying, okay, I see that the road is going here and I don't want to go there. I want to go off and do my own thing in virtually a climate when there probably weren't a lot of examples of people doing that because the internet was relatively new.
Yeah. When I made the decision, we were a couple of years removed from the first internet bubble, which was nearly 20 years ago now. And it was nasty. I mean, everyone is super excited. It's a lot like it is right now, the way that people are excited about the economy, technology, all that kind of stuff, and the markets and crypto and all that sort of stuff. I'm not saying it's going to burst right now, but it definitely is a possibility. So after that happened, there was, a lot of people who had jumped into technology because it was so exciting, it was a future, suddenly had to jump back out, and they went back to investment banking and consulting and lawyering and all the traditional kind of good jobs. But I was in San Francisco because my wife went to grad school there. We moved there, and I always had this idea in the back of my mind that I wanted to try entrepreneurship. I just wasn't sure when the right time was for me. And I think I was maybe 27, 28 or so at the time when we moved to San Francisco, and I was reconnecting with old colleagues. And I talked to someone who I'd worked with like 4 or 5 years ago. And he And it turned out that he was starting a new company and he was looking actively for co-founders. So we just kept having conversations, and it turns out it was the right time for me. That startup didn't succeed ultimately, but I was kind of at the age where I was considering business school or entrepreneurship. And I would say I learned as much or more from entrepreneurship. It didn't cost me as much as business school would have. And so I'm really glad that I made that choice. I saw somebody recently on Twitter talking about how glad they were that they became an entrepreneur instead of going to business school. And I think for a lot of people, especially now, that's the right choice. But once I got a taste of that, of working for myself, of trying to build my own thing, after that first startup didn't work, there was really no question about me going back to a traditional job. I just wasn't going to do it. I was soured on that life, and I was sort of, for better or worse, intoxicated by entrepreneurship. And I knew that I had to try it again.
How did that first quote unquote failure actually feel in the moment?
Horrible, like incredibly stressful. Lawyers got involved. There were shouting matches. I felt ashamed. I was really worried about what was going to happen next. We were fighting, there was a lot of stuff happening. I felt really bad for my wife, having invested so much trust in me over several years, only to see this thing not work after I told her, babe, this is going to go great, just wait. And of course it didn't. So it was bad. The saving grace in that whole situation was that I realized how burned out I was and how incapable I was at thinking clearly at that time. So instead of just jumping into another thing, we decided to take a sabbatical, and we set off on a road trip through Mexico for 6 months. And I'm so glad I did that, because it really changed the trajectory of my entrepreneurial career. And it allowed me time to clear my head, get away from all the normal social influences I was around. And at that time, it was the Silicon Valley style of entrepreneurship, which is a whole different ballgame from what people are doing now on the internet. And I'm really glad that I got into that. In 2010, when I said that a lot of people thought maybe I was throwing my life away or whatever, you have to remember that the creator economy, or whatever you want to call it now, really was in its infancy. People didn't know if you could make money blogging or podcasting, because it was really unproven. It was almost a fluke if anyone did at the time. Tim Ferriss definitely was on the leading edge of that with his book and podcasting and everything else. And as were a number of other people, Brian Clark from Copyblogger and others, Danielle Laporte. But from the outside looking in, I think people would say, wait a second, Corbett was in a consulting career that looked great. That maybe didn't work out or something. I don't know why he quit that. Then he tried to be an entrepreneur, and that didn't work out. And now what's he doing? Blogging? Like, how he must be losing it, right? His whole thing. And so I had to work really hard, and maybe that gave me a little bit of a chip on my shoulder, or something to prove. And that maybe gave me the endurance to get through those lean, painful years in the beginning of that second phase of entrepreneurship.
Going back to the sabbatical, how do you make the decision that you're going to take X amount of time? How do you make the decision that you're going to go to Mexico, of all places?
My wife had recently graduated from grad school, so she was in the beginning of her career, and it was easy for her to take time off. I thought that if I went into something right away, I might make a bad decision. And I knew also that on the sabbatical, I would be doing work in a way. I would be doing self-exploration. I would be thinking about how intentionally I wanted to build my next business. So I felt like I could make progress without having to immediately start another business, and that I could build my next thing on a better foundation, a foundation built with more self-realization, self-actualization, that sort of thing. And that's exactly what it was. I mean, there's something about escaping from 50, 60-hour weeks in the middle of a busy city like San Francisco to feeling the sand beneath your bare feet and a warm ocean to really clear your head. And it was easy for me to spend several hours a day reading and researching and thinking about things and having conversations with people I trusted and meeting new people and all that sort of stuff. So it was really useful for me. In terms of deciding on the sabbatical, it just seemed like a good clean break. I had been at my career for 10 years or so, and we also had always romanticized the idea of getting to know Mexico for some reason, because it's so close to us yet so far away and so foreign in some ways. And we really wanted to just get on the ground and explore and get to know the country.
What types of things did you explore personally?
Well, I started asking myself questions about the nature of career and life. And the fact that most people sort of assume that your career is a means to an end, and the end is retirement or becoming wealthy or young enough so that you can do something that you would enjoy. And my wife, being an artist, sort of had this other example. We've seen plenty of documentaries of like this adorable 85-year-old couple in New York City who's living the exact same life they've lived for 50 years in their apartment. They wake up, they read the paper, they go for a walk, and then he writes and she's a painter or whatever. And they still do that today, even though they're 85, because they actually enjoy their work and they were able to live their lives around their career instead of the other way around, right? And I was wondering if entrepreneurship could provide that path so that I didn't have to sort of live my life at the edges in the evenings and on the weekend. What if I actually loved what I did, but also could do what I did whenever I wanted to and wherever I wanted to? And so that led me down the path of diving into topics like location independence, digital nomading, and lifestyle design. And Tim Ferriss and the 4-Hour Workweek was certainly part of that. And also there were a lot of people at the time starting to wonder about location independence, which now is remote work and everybody's been doing it because of the pandemic. But at the time, it wasn't all that possible. We didn't have Zoom.
What were some of the books you explored? You mentioned the 4-Hour Workweek. Any other notable?
The 4-Hour Workweek, The Alchemist. Have you ever read The Alchemist? It's just a classic, easy read that makes you think about, what your life is about. I don't know. I would say that honestly, I spend a lot more time reading blogs and consuming podcasts and listening to people than I do necessarily consuming and remembering books. And there's a whole cadre of people from the 2008 to 2010, 11 period who were writing about location independence and digital nomading and so on. And a lot of those people I'm still friends with. They're still out there on the internet. A lot of that overlapped with travel blogging as well. And so just plugging into the conversations that were happening at the time, a lot of times it's really hard to write a book that is super on top of the zeitgeist and what's happening with technology and so on. So the foundational books, obviously the ones that get you to consider what life is about are important, but podcasts and blogs sometimes are the best source.
Definitely. One thing I noticed from looking at you and your blog and everything you've done is that you were talking about people who would go on to do incredible things. People like Pat Flynn and John Lee Dumas. And it was really interesting to me to, one, research old blog posts of yours, but also to see who you're working with today and knowing that I was following those people in 2010 too. So it leads me to ask, what types of traits do you use to evaluate talent in people?
So I think there's kind of two ingredients for me. They are maybe three. People who are smart, but also get things done and are humble about it. And I think those are three really important qualities. I would say that if you're smart and get things done, but not humble, you can still get a lot. I just don't necessarily want to spend a lot of time with you. And we, there are examples of people like that. And some of them, by nature of not being humble, by being ego driven, can actually do a lot. But for me, the people that I identify as talent and want to be around, they clearly have a vision. They clearly grasp new concepts quickly. So they're great thinkers, but they're also able to take that and apply it and actually do something. And this was a trap that I think I was in my 20s, where I felt like being smart was enough. I didn't have the work ethic, and probably it was just my upbringing in school. I coasted a lot. I was able to kind of do the bare minimums, but still do well on the tests and so on. And so I never really got that homework kind of work ethic. And same for me in college. So I think there's a trap for people who are smart and feel like that should be enough, because ideas, as Derek Sivers says, are just a multiplier of execution. And the best idea in the world is worth nothing if you don't do everything to make it come to life. So people who are smart and get things done, and then looking at the time, identifying people that I've hired and also people that I've just gotten to know and befriended on the internet. You mentioned Pat Flynn, John Lee Dumas, others that I've hired who are doing amazing things: Chase Reeves, Barrett Brooks, Steph Crowder, Caleb Wojcik, a friend of mine who passed away that I was fortunate enough to work with for a long time, Scott Dinsmore, was absolutely brilliant and was on an incredible trajectory. So you can see that spark in people. I'd say, the fact that they're smart a lot of times comes across in curiosity and being engaging in conversation and so on. But, I think being able to identify that talent, the reason it matters is, of course, if you're going to do anything meaningful, you're probably gonna have to work with other people. But also, even if you're an independent entrepreneur, a solopreneur, whatever, you need to identify those folks when they're still getting started, so that you have this amazing network of people 5 years or 10 years from now. Because it's really hard to just ring up Tim Ferriss or Gary Vee or whoever you like and say, hey, I'd love to be on your podcast. Some people could do it if they're really creative, but for the most part, you're going to have to start a tier or two down. And if you're going to do that, you might as well try to find people that are going to grow with you, so that 5 years from now, you're trading spots on podcasts and it's mutually beneficial.
You mentioned just now that you were at one point smart, but not hardworking. You didn't get that until a certain point. So at what point did it click that you needed to work hard as well? Was there a moment in that evolution?
Yeah, I think it was realizing that it's this productivity thing for me. It's recognizing that the enjoyment or lack thereof of an individual task isn't necessarily what matters. It's, what is this task helping me accomplish in the future? And this is really an existential question for humanity. Do you just hang out all day and enjoy yourself because you're in the present, in the moment, enjoying it? Or is there something that you want to accomplish in the future? And there's a tension there, because of course we know that we should be mindful, we should be present, we should be enjoying today, because tomorrow might not ever come. And that's possible for all of us at any time. However, I think if you get to the end of your life and you look back and you recognize that you just lived a life of hedonism, where you were just enjoying yourself day to day and never worked hard to actually accomplish something, you'll realize that there was something missing. So there's something to both of those. I changed my Twitter profile recently to say that I'm an aspiring bon vivant with workaholic tendencies. And what that means to me is, a bon vivant is someone who's known for enjoying the finer things in life, for enjoying long, lazy dinners, for enjoying travel, all that sort of stuff. And I love all of that. But I also love, now that I've gotten into it, working hard enough that I know I am moving towards something meaningful, because that pursuit of goals, not necessarily the accomplishment of goals, but the regular pursuit of goals that doesn't burn me out, because it's a marathon, not a sprint, that leads to a lot of fulfillment, as well as being juxtaposed with the having a 3-hour dinner with friends.
What are you pursuing these days? What's on your mind? Is that North Star that you're chasing?
Well, several things. My wife and I just went into escrow on a big home in Northwest Portland, and we're going to be renovating it. It has development potential. We're going to be doing a lot of things there. I'm really excited about that. I love physical spaces and that sort of thing. I have two businesses right now, Fizzle, which is a video training library and community for entrepreneurs. And I have a community platform, which is sort of like a Slack or Facebook groups called Palapa. Both of those things take an enormous amount of time and effort. And I'm currently seeking help from potential co-founders, partners, that sort of thing, so that I can better fulfill my vision. Another tension that you have, or that I have, is this difference between doing everything on my own, which is really fun because a lot of the rolling up the sleeves I like, but accomplishing meaningful things usually requires getting other people involved in some way, whether they're partners or employees or co-founders or whatever. So the pendulum for me is swinging back that direction. And so I'm seeking people to help out on those things.
You mentioned Palapa, and in doing research for this conversation, I found out that you're working with Eckhart Tolle or Eckhart Tolle. I don't know how to pronounce that.
Yeah.
How did that partnership come to be?
Well, back in 2012 or so, when I was individual blogging, helping people both as a consultant as well as with online courses, I offered a coaching package. And one of the people who took me up on that coaching package to get her site off the ground is now running the business side of things for a company that manages Eckhart Tolle, as well as a number of other spiritual and mindfulness type gurus. And she brought me in to bring Palapa in and to advise on several other things. So that's a case where I offered a coaching package that was limited. I could only do a couple of people because it was very hands-on. I had a number of applications. I chose a couple of people to work with, and one of them really had that spark. And she is a rising star. She's doing amazing things. I'm super happy to be able to support her in this effort. But now it's paying back enormously because Eckhart is one of our biggest customers, and it's a really great name to have as a customer.
How did you choose her specifically?
Well, there are markers, I think, when you're looking for evidence of people who are smart but get things done. You can look at their past and have them explain projects to you, try to get a feel for the part that they've played on the project, and have them explain to you problems that they worked through so that you can start to understand how their brain works and how they dissect a problem, because that's one of the most important skills we have today. Before AI replaces us, we all have to get really good at creating things for humans to consume and at breaking down problems that haven't been solved before. So looking at that, and then she happened to have a couple of classic markers of capability, classic markers being somewhere that you've worked, somewhere that you've gone to school, that sort of thing. And sometimes those can work. I don't take those at face value. I'm not one to look at a degree or a diploma or a resume and say, oh, that person's for me. But if you do that, you interview someone, you get to know them, and it all lines up, then that can be a contributing factor.
Yeah, makes sense. So you brought up also Fizzle before, and in doing research, I saw so many incredible testimonials and people loving it so much. And so my question for you is, why do you think people love Fizzle so much?
I would say it's because we care about the outcomes that our customer achieves. And that means a lot of times staying on the phone for way over what would seem like a reasonable amount of time for a Zoom call. It means checking in with people outside. It means forwarding people opportunities and, just really genuinely being invested in someone's success and making that your North Star. I think whatever venture you're in, it helps to have a single North Star that tells you whether or not you are accomplishing success for both you and your customers. And it always has to be both. For Fizzle, it is making sure that our customers are making progress in their own businesses towards their own dreams. And then all of our decisions flow from that. In Palapa, it's making sure that we are creating a platform that helps communities engage. So if you, Danny, have a community of people who listen to your podcast, we want to give you the tools to engage your community outside of the normal platforms in a place that you own. And those North Star things, I think, can just help answer so many questions, because if you don't have one, you can get into that pros and cons analysis paralysis of trying to make decisions. Well, maybe we should do it this way because it's cheaper, or maybe we should do it this way because so-and-so did it. But if you know what you're working towards, then it helps a lot.
Those are both two qualitative descriptions. Do you have any quantifiable metrics then to say like, yes, we're working towards that? Is that accurate?
Of course. Yeah. And in a subscription business, of course, you look at churn and activation. So activation is on the front when someone signs up for a free trial, what percentage of them actually take some actions to experience the platform and get stuck in, actually become a user. And then churn is how long do people stay on your platform? We also have done surveys of our audience to find out the kind of progress that they've individually made towards their goals from using our platforms. So there are all sorts of quantitative things. I would say that I have experimented at times with being a little obsessed with quantitative dashboards and trying to instrument and measure everything. And then I've gone back to just doing everything by the gut. And I would say the right answer is probably somewhere in between. I don't think you need more than 2 or 3 real serious metrics. If you have an organization with, a lot of people in it, then of course, all of the top line people, your VPs or whatever, they would have their own metrics. But if you're a small organization, a single person, you really can't focus on more than a couple of things at once. In fact, I take that all the way to, in a given day, I only expect myself to be able to accomplish 2 or 3 things. And if I get those tasks done, they better be important tasks, first of all, but I also don't have to beat myself up because I didn't get the 10 things on my list done. If there are other things at the end of the list past the 2 or 3 that were important, I'm okay with them moving to the next day.
Fizzle and Palapa are 2 closed systems, right? So how do you think about that in your pursuit of taking out most of the closed systems in your own life?
It's a good question. And I think one of the challenges of open systems is being able to build a business on top of them and to turn that into something. A lot of what we publish at Fizzle is open. Actually, we have a podcast, we have hundreds of blog articles, we've published tons of YouTubes, all that sort of stuff. The closed piece is something that people pay for. And I think until we figure out a way to open and monetize at the same time, there will need to be a little bit of closed piece to it. And this is, again, back to the profit motive and the tension that people feel. But I think you also just have to consider the decisions that you're making to keep people coming back. And like Instagram, sending all of those nasty messages like you're going to miss out, your life is going to be ruined if you don't come back. I think that's overreach, and it's not actually in the interest of their consumers necessarily. They just want you to come back at all costs. So in our case, if my goal is legitimately to help people make progress in their business, and it comes to a point where they've outgrown Fizzle or their business isn't the right fit or something, I am more than happy to see them go on. I also recognize that sometimes people come back either as a customer or as someone who is going to help you on the journey in the future. And so if you put a really great impression in someone's mind, they don't forget that. And it's regularly that I hear from someone I haven't talked to for 5 or 10 or 15 years from the internet or from my career, who comes across something that I've done and they say, "Oh my God, I can't believe it. I haven't heard from you in so long. I'm doing this now. And, I think I could help you out, or we could work together." And it's just an amazing synergy that happens because I know them from my experience with them as a customer, and they know that I'm a genuine, caring person who has their best interests in mind.
Doing the right thing is always the right thing, as Gary Vaynerchuk would say. But where did that come from in you? Was that something you always had, or was that something you've built over time?
Well, my parents are the kind to always do the right thing. They're the kind to always show up to help you move or pick you up from the airport or do any of that kind of stuff. And I think that was just instilled in me in a very young age. I would say there is a category of people in this country and maybe in all countries, but who are really earnest, hardworking, caring, and will give you the shirt off their back. The trick, I would say, is doing that in a way that also has your own interests in mind, because I think that it's easy to do that and to maybe not be taken advantage of, but to not be looking after yourself and to be building something better for yourself. And I would say that if we pay attention to bettering ourselves, bettering our circumstances, and to building something that can serve a lot of people, then we are better equipped to pass on that generosity and that caring to people around us and to help other people. So I think there's a balance there, and I've just gotten on a track where I'm trying to do both at the same time. I'm realizing that doing better or doing good is always the right thing. Would you say doing the right thing is always the right thing? I like that. So I realized that, and that doing the right thing is often the way to accomplish what I want. If you put someone's best interest in mind and give them a tool to help them do that, they will help you accomplish what you want, but you also need to charge for that thing. And it's okay to charge for that thing, because if there's true value there, if you give someone a podcast episode, or if you give someone a tool where they can spend $30 a month with you, or they can spend $200 for a course or whatever, and then turn that into something that's of more value to them, then it's a win-win scenario.
Something I'm thinking about these days, and I appreciate you bringing that to my attention.
Good.
So thank you. Is there anything else you'd like to mention, or anything else you'd like to tell the audience or talk to me about before we wrap it up?
I know that there is a ton of uncertainty in entrepreneurship and with doing your own thing. If you're thinking about, building a YouTube channel or a Twitch stream or a podcast or whatever, there's so much uncertainty. Can I do it? Am I the right person? Is this for real? Do people actually make money doing this? Am I too late? Is there too much competition? Right? We're all thinking about all those sorts of things. And I would say that if you're having those thoughts, it's completely normal. Every entrepreneur has them. I had them. It's only after 5 or 10 years of being in entrepreneurship that you start to gain some comfort with the uncertainty, and you start to realize that I can make this work. I don't know what the actual inputs will be, what the outcomes will be, what hurdles I'm going to accomplish, whether if I start, trying to build this thing, that I won't end up actually building this completely other thing that I'm not sure of right now, don't even know about. So all of that is totally normal. And it's more likely, I think, sometimes when you're even younger, because you have all these friends and family around you saying, like, you're crazy. Like, what are you thinking? Just go get a safe, comfortable job. So if you are thinking about doing this thing, there's no harm in trying it for a while, because you will experience personal growth. You will gain skills. You will meet people. You will do a lot of things that will be valuable to you, whether you actually succeed with your specific goal or not. And those things that you gain that are valuable will be useful to you down the road, whether you continue the entrepreneurship path or you decide to be a consultant or an advisor or a freelancer or an employee or whatever it is.
It's a beautiful, beautiful statement there. Where can people find more from you and more from Corbett Barr?
I would just head over to CorbettBarr.com, and you can find all of the latest things that I'm up to there.
Awesome. Well, thank you for your time. Thank you for the wisdom. I really appreciate it. And I'm sure people did as well.
Awesome. Thanks, Danny, for having me on. Appreciate it.